Hello, everybody, and welcome to the March Virtual Planetarium with Pete Lawrence and myself, Paul Abel. And as ever, we will start with the inner solar system and work our way outwards. So, starting with Mercury, then, well, Mercury's actually got a decent shot of seeing it in March. It's an evening planet at the start of March. It sets about 1.5 hours after the sun on the 1st of March and shines at minus zero point 0.9, a magnitude minus zero point 0.9, which is reasonably bright for Mercury.
That's not bad at all, actually, is it? And there's a 3% lit waxing crescent moon, 7.3 degrees to the east-northeast of Mercury on the 1st. So both objects are visible in the darkening evening twilight after sunset.
Yeah, so it's a good time to catch it this time of year, isn't it? If you've never seen Mercury before, you will need a fairly clear western horizon. But this is the time I normally recommend people have a go at trying to see it.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because Mercury doesn't ever get that far from the sun. In fact, it reaches greatest eastern elongation on the 8th of March when it is at its furthest from the sun, and it's only 18.2 degrees away from the sun at that time. But because it's in that bright bit of evening twilight, even though, I mean, you sort of dismiss it at magnitude minus 0.9, even though it's quite bright. But you think, if you were in the normal sky, in a normal dark sky, and you had an object which was minus 0.9, it would stand out like a sore thumb.
It would be very, very prominent, yeah, but because it's low down, yeah.
But in that bright twilight, it just gets lost completely, and people look for it and they go, no, I can't see it, and then they just give up. You've got to really put the time in to see it, because once you have locked on to that tiny little intense dot in the darkening twilight, you wonder how you've ever missed it. But there's so few people who've ever seen Mercury.
It is, and telescopically, it is an interesting inner object in that it definitely has a distinctly orange colour to it, and you could see the phase as well. I do have a couple of drawings of it. It is worth looking at if you've never seen it before.
And I've caught it during the day, actually, but you do need good seeing because it is quite a small planet. And so if you want to pick up any details, if you're trying to image it, for example, you do need the steadiness of atmosphere. And that's when you're going to get it, of course, when Mercury is higher in the sky. And hopefully, if it's a lovely, clear, sunny day, you will have nice, steady atmosphere to look at it through.
Indeed. Well, moving on out then, a planet which is still fairly distinctive in the evening sky, and that's the planet Venus. So,
yes.
Venus makes a rapid dash towards the sun now. It's noticeable how it's dropping in altitude compared to earlier in the year. It'll come to inferior conjunction, so between the Earth and the sun, on the 23rd of March. And after that, it'll appear in the morning sky. But on the 1st of March, it is really very, very bright, magnitude minus 4.2, and sets just a little over 3 hours after the sun. So worth taking a look. We are now in the crescent stage of Venus, so anybody who's interested in trying to image the night side using an infrared camera, this is the time to do it because the crescent is getting smaller and Venus, the apparent size of Venus, is increasing as it comes closer to the Earth.
Yeah, and also because we do have inferior conjunction on the 23rd, this is a wide inferior conjunction. Venus passes quite a distance from the sun. So if you are familiar with working close to the sun, if you're not familiar, then you need to be very, very careful, of course. But if you are familiar with working close to the sun, then it is possible to follow Venus through inferior conjunction. And it's a rather odd thing because obviously, when it's on one side of the sun, the crescent points towards the sun. And as you get to the other side of the sun, it's pointing in the other direction. So there must be a point where it twists over. And I have followed it through this before in the past. And it's really quite a short window when it does that twist. It's quite interesting.
It's a couple of hours. I've seen it visually. I've done it a couple of times. And it's actually only a couple of hours. It's quite remarkable how quickly, as you say, it turns over as it goes onto the other side of the sun.
Remarkable. Absolutely remarkable. Okay, well, on the 2nd of March, there's a 10% lit waxing crescent moon, 10.2 degrees to the east of Venus. And also, Venus and Mercury are in conjunction on the 12th as well. So that's probably going to be a last chance to spot it in the evening sky before it heads towards inferior conjunction. It moves so quickly. We've had it in the sky for such a number of weeks now. You get complacent about its visibility, and then suddenly it's gone.
It's gone. Yeah, absolutely. Well, next planet out then, Mars. Still a viable target. It's in the evening sky,
Yeah.
in the constellation of Gemini. Still reasonable size. On the 1st of March, its peak altitude is 63 degrees, early evening under dark sky conditions. And it's around about 10 arc seconds in apparent diameter now. So,
Which is still very decent, isn't it?
It is. So a telescope 4.5 inches larger, maybe, will show you the polar ice cap. The North Polar ice cap is still quite prominent.
Yeah.
So that's at the bottom in a normal mirror inverting telescope. And we've got the markings on the disk as well, like the Syrtis Major, Acidalium. And we've seen a lot of white cloud activity on Mars recently. So if you put on a blue filter, if you're looking visually, put on a blue filter, and any white cloud will appear as bright patches through the filter, so on the disk. So worth watching out for.
Yeah, the clouds and the weather on Mars, I mean, they can be quite subtle, of course, but they are quite impressive sometimes. And I think we sort of tend to forget about them a little bit because we think of it as just another planet out there with its regular markings and whatever. But they do, even the regular markings change, don't they, over time?
They do. Because of the dust storms on Mars, they deposit vast quantities of dust on the markings, so they go through changes from year to year. And the other thing as well, the white cloud activity I mentioned earlier has been really quite prominent this year. And on the limb of the planet, the edges, when you've got dark features appearing, they've got this kind of bluish tint to them because of all the light being scattered by these early morning clouds. So that's also nice to watch out for.
Oh, that's great. And also, if you don't have equipment to look at Mars, on the 9th of March, around 1:40 in the morning, Mars appears 56 arc minutes south of the centre of a 74% lit waxing gibbous moon, which is pretty close, actually, because the moon itself is about, 30 arc minutes across?
Yeah.
So you can knock 15 arc minutes off the 56, and you can see that Mars is going to be pretty close to the edge of the moon at that time.
Well, so that's been nice to watch out for. The largest planet in our solar system, Jupiter, is still a viable target. It's in Taurus, but the observing window is now beginning to close, and we're starting to see Jupiter move into the evening twilight a bit more. We have had some interesting phenomena on Jupiter. In particular, we've had this North Temperate Belt outbreak whereby the North Temperate Belt is one of the belts on the planet Jupiter, and it's disappeared. And then you get these series of white storms, brilliant white objects that appear where the belt was, and they erupt, produce this coloration, and the belt returns. So that's certainly been a fascinating thing to watch. Seems to happen recurring every 4 or 5 years, this phenomenon.
There's been a south equatorial belt disturbance as well, hasn't there?
There has, that's right. So the zone so you could roughly break the southern equatorial belt up into 2 bits. There's a darker prominent southern component, another bit underneath that, which is the northern component, and in between this lighter zone. And in this lighter zone, in the middle of the belt, we've seen these brilliant white plumes erupt and produce all this material, which will eventually reach the site of the Great Red Spot and get churned up before going back to normal. So very, very strange weather on Jupiter recently.
Very dynamic.
Very dynamic, yes.
Yeah, okay. Well, Jupiter is visited by a 41% lit waxing crescent moon on the 5th of March, the moon 8.4 degrees northwest of the planet at 23:30 UT. It's actually quite a dramatic sight seeing the moon near Jupiter, because Jupiter is a very bright planet, of course. So that's something to look out for. The next planet out is Saturn, which is not visible this month, which is a bit of a shame because we actually have a ring plane crossing on the 23rd of March, but Saturn is in solar conjunction on the 12th of March, so it'll be too close to the sun to actually see that event. A ring plane crossing is when we basically see Saturn sideways on, and the rings, which are incredibly thin, will disappear from view for a short period of time. You get ring plane crossings. They come in triples or singles. When you get a single one, it tends not to be visible.
No.
But the triples you can see. And that's not because Saturn is rocking backwards and forwards. It's just the geometry of Earth's position and Saturn's position which causes this effect that we see more than one ring plane crossing. It actually occurs because Saturn itself is going to be at an equinox where it's sideways on to the sun. And that allows us to see some interesting effects with the moons because, for example, Titan can move between the Sun and Saturn, and it can cast its shadow onto Saturn, and it can also appear to transit Saturn as we see it from Earth. Now, the timings on these are critical because if you get one which is well timed for visibility from the UK, the next one occurs about 16 days after that, at similar time, just a slight variation in the time. So basically, if you get a poor timings for transits, then the next one will be poor, and the next one will be poor, and it'll take ages for them to get into the right position. And it's been extremely frustrating because we've had such poor weather recently to actually catch these events.
It's been practically eternal cloud cover here. I mean, and the few nights we have had has either been very windy or the seeing's been dreadful. So
I caught a transit the other night actually, and the seeing was so poor that Saturn just looks completely out of focus. The image looks out of focus, which.
Yeah,
it might have been out of focus, of course.
No,
but,
I do.
No, it was just really, really bad. But don't give up. The fact that we're losing Saturn because it's going into solar conjunction and the ring plane crossing is occurring this month isn't the end of these events. They will continue all the way through to the end of 2025.
So there's a bit of time yet
There's a bit of time, and we actually will have opportunity to see Titan transit. We haven't been able to see that yet. So that's quite exciting. So we keep our fingers crossed that the weather will improve and we will get another chance to see these amazing events.
Absolutely.
Okay, what about Uranus then?
So Uranus is still a viable target. It's located 19 degrees west of Jupiter, but the window is closing on this object as well. At magnitude 5.8, you probably will need a telescope and dark skies to pick it up.
Yeah.
The colour is quite unmistakable, I think, in a small telescope. They're very, very vivid greenish colour to it.
Yes, it
is. You'll have no doubt when you picked it up. Also, once you use a little bit of magnification, it stops being a starlight point and does become a little glowing disk.
A little glowing disk, as is the case with the outer main planet, Neptune, which, I'll take this one, Paul, isn't visible this month.
I knew you'd have to do that one. I knew the strain might be too much for you. All right, so we do have some specials this month. Not perhaps as many as usual, but there are some nice things to look out for in March. And we'll start with the 4th of March. We've got a double shadow transit event that can be seen on Jupiter between 2336 UT and 0212 on the 5th of March. These are the shadows of Ganymede and Europa. Ganymede's shadow is worth catching, actually, because it is quite a large shadow.
It's a very obvious one, yeah.
It really is quite unmistakable, and I should think even a 75mm telescope would be able to pick that out. It's very distinctive.
On the 5th, we've got another Jovian moon, the outer Galilean Callisto, which sits 1 arcsecond north of Jupiter's limb at 1957 UT. Now, you might think, is that particularly special? Well, it is, because we're now heading towards a Jovian equinox as well. So the elliptical orbit of Callisto, which normally allows the moon to miss the planet when it lines up with the planet, is now beginning to become more edge-on to us. So Callisto will begin to interact with Jupiter itself, and which is something you don't see that often, to be honest. So this is quite nice to sort of pick up these events where Callisto is getting really close to the edge of Jupiter. In 1 arcsecond is not that big, is it? So it'll sort of appear under bad seeing to merge in with Jupiter's disk.
Yeah, it's certainly an interesting one, as you say, Callisto, because it's the outermost of the Galilean moons. It takes a long time to move around in its orbit.
Quite a dark moon as well.
It is quite a dark moon, but still, yeah, if you catch these Callisto events, they're worth doing. Also on the 5th, 40% lit waxing crescent moons. It's less than 4 degrees from the Pleiades open cluster in the early evening. And the planet Venus is now showing a phase of 10% and is an enormous 52 arc seconds across in apparent diameter.
That's big.
So it is quite large, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, on the 6th of March, in the early hours, the 42% lit waxing crescent moon is near bright Jupiter, as we mentioned before. Then later in the day, after sunset, the first quarter moon still appears near Jupiter. So if you sort of catch it in the early hours of the 6th, and then you catch it in the evening as well, as if we're going to get clear weather for a whole day. Can you imagine that?
No, I can't imagine it at all. I think wishful thinking on your part.
Then you get a good feel for how the moon moves relative to the planets.
Indeed. Okay, on the 8th of March, we have a view of the 70% lit waxing gibbous moon through binoculars or a small telescope at 2 o'clock, 1400. Will show a clair obscure effect known as the jeweled handle. And it's caused by the light from the lunar dawn hitting the peaks of the Jura mountain range. Quite a striking sight, actually, and worth trying to get during the day. It is an unusual sight during the day.
Yeah, it's very, very obvious. I do remember, actually, we observed together. I think it was for a Sky at Night shoot, and the moon was up in the day, and we just sort of had a look at it. And that curving arc was very visible. I remember trying to grab it with a mobile phone, and it picked it up quite clearly.
It was. It is quite distinctive. On the 11th of March, Venus is less than 5% illuminated. So very now brilliant crescent, 56 arc seconds across. So definitely worth looking out for that. And if you can get it later on in the day, Ganymede will transit Jupiter's disk between 21:25 and 23:58 UT.
Interesting you should say about Venus being 56 arc seconds across. The limit of human eye resolution is about an arc minute, isn't it? So we've mentioned this before when we've done virtual planetaria in the past. The fact that you can potentially, some people can actually see the crescent, the phase of Venus, but it is right on the edge of perception. And I think the way to do it is to get somebody to look at the planet, and then you ask them to sketch what they can see and the orientation without telling them what it is they're looking for. Yeah. And that's probably the best blind way of picking up whether they've seen it or not.
It is. I have to say I think I've convinced myself when a number of years ago, I could see the phase of Venus with the naked eye. But as you say, you kind of know what the orientation would be, and when it gets towards early evening, it's scintillating quite a bit because it's getting close to the sun again. It's so difficult to tell whether you've really seen it or not.
The difficulty is that with the naked eye, it's like an intense point source of light, and it picks out every imperfection or the very thought of in your eyesight. And the problem is you can sort of look at it and you can sometimes get an elongation in a certain direction. You think, that's the crescent. But then if you try and turn your head, which is actually harder to do than you might think, that sort of defect rotates with you, of course. So it's
a tough one.
It's a tricky one. It's a tough one. Okay, on the 12th of March, we have the minor planet Flora, which reaches opposition. Now, we're mentioning this because if you can keep with Flora into the following month, Flora will move across one of the galaxies in the Leo triplet. So that's something to look forward to.
Well, that's an interesting thing there. I wonder if that's ever caused any supernovae out. People thinking they've seen a supernovae when it's just an asteroid. It probably hasn't, has it? Because they look quite different. But...
Well, there was a professional announcement of a supernova in Sagittarius a few years ago, wasn't there? Which turned out to be the planet Mars. Unfortunate.
That is rather unfortunate. I don't know who that was, and I don't want to know either. It's that is unfortunate. But on the 14th, though, we do have something really interesting to look forward to. This is the total lunar eclipse, which occurs in the morning, starting at 03:57 UT, but unfortunately it does end after the moon has set, and totality occurs just before moonset, so it's going to be really difficult to see from the UK.
I think it's probably the cruelest lunar eclipse you can ever get, because totality occurs just as the moon is about to set. And if you've ever observed an early morning total lunar eclipse, you might think, oh, it's going to be really dramatic. But as the moon gets dark, and it depends how dark it gets, of course, and the sky gets bright, you sort of lose sight of the moon.
Yeah. You have to use a telescope to track it. It is tough to do.
It's quite hard. So, that's moonset is about 6:34 UT from the centre of the UK. So you can watch the partial phase leading up to it, and, you probably will be able to see around totality, a hint of totality, but it's not going to be the best time lunar eclipse for us. But don't give up, because there is another eclipse coming up this month. Venus reaches inferior conjunction, we said, on the 23rd when it passes the centre of the sun by 8.4 degrees. So there is a challenge in the magazine, actually, if you want to have a go and try and see Venus at that time. But do be careful, it is very close to the sun.
It is, but it is worth doing if you could do it, and a good chance to learn how to use setting circles on your telescope. If you may have wondered what they are, they're not just simply decorative parts of your equatorial mount. They are very, very useful things for finding objects in the daytime. But as Pete says, please be very, very careful with the sun.
Okay, on the 24th, lunar libration will feature the southwest part of the moon, which is the area which includes the beautiful but very foreshortened Mare Orientale, the eastern sea, rather ironically, on the western side of the sun. And then on the 29th, that's when we get another eclipse, which is a partial eclipse of the sun.
Yes.
And this one is visible from around 10 UT in the morning. We need to be safe as well, because it is the sun, but it's a decent eclipse from the UK. Northwest Scotland gets 57% of the sun's of a magnitude 57% eclipse, I should say, which means that the sun extends 57% across the sun. The moon extends 57% across the sun's diameter. That's what I meant to say. Southeast England gets the rawest deal with 39% magnitude eclipse, but that's still decent as well. So it's something to look out for.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see whether you could detect any fall off in light there. With 40%, 7%, it's nearly half the solar disk gone.
You should be able to
detect that. Yeah, I think.
But you won't, because you won't with your eyes, because the change in light levels is gradual, and your eyes just get accustomed to it.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you can see a exoplanet moving across the disk of a star, however many light years away, you can certainly detect a difference in the light level with half the sun disappeared.
I haven't personally done that though, Pete, so
there's a little project for somebody to do, and do a graph.
I'll do a graph. I'll squint hard at a star that we know has got an exoplanet and see if I can get a light curve. Okay, well, that's all the specials. We should just mention that daylight savings comes into effect on the 30th of March at 0100 UT in the morning.
Ooh.
So wretched thing, it is a nuisance, isn't it? That means the clock advances 1 hour to become 0200 BST, which is a nuisance.
2 UT, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, during March, of course, the centre of the sun's disk appears to cross the celestial equator, heading south to north, which is good if you're into nice bright summer days. Not so good if you're
Do we have those? I didn't think we had those anymore. All we seem to get is rain, but okay.
I don't know. I mean, in the old days, you used to be able to predict the weather quite accurately, but now it's actually quite difficult. It has got harder.
It has. I think it's just too unpredictable now. It's just too difficult to do.
Yeah.
But, hopefully we'll get some nicer days, as you say.
Okay, well, this crossing of the celestial equator occurs at 9:01 UT on the 20th of March. Not that the time is particularly relevant. You won't see anything, of course, but that's the Northern Hemisphere's spring or vernal equinox. If you're in the Southern Hemisphere, it's your autumn equinox. So, that's when the day and night are often said to be equal but that isn't actually true. The days when that occurs are known as the equinoxes, and for the UK, because it varies with latitude, our equinox is about the 17th of March.
Right.
So that's when daylight and nighttime are of equal length.
Right.
If you actually get to see all of that, if the clouds allow you.
Well, speaking of the night sky this time of year now, well, the brash winter constellations are starting to disappear into the west and are replaced by the sort of more subtle constellations of spring. And I think the most recognisable springtime constellation is probably Leo the Lion. Its brightest star is Alpha Leonis, also known as Regulus, representing a remarkably unimpressive part of this big cat, would you say, Pete?
Well, Regulus.
Yeah.
That's what I don't know what it represents really. I suppose it's the front bottom of the of the neck. I mean, Regulus means little king.
Yeah, but
it's. I mean, the sickle is supposed to represent the lion's head.
yeah, I mean, you can see that. It kind of looks like a cat sitting in profile, I guess. But
yeah.
If with a bit of imagination, anyway.
A bit of imagination, as with all constellations and asterisms, really. If you can you can recognise the plough or the saucepan. Let's call it the saucepan because people recognise what a saucepan looks like, which is sort of balancing on the tip of its handle at this time of year. If you can see the pan of the saucepan, you can extend the two sides of the pan to the right, and they will, with a bit of artistic license, actually point at Regulus.
Yeah, it's a good way of finding it, actually. And I think it's not a brilliantly distinctive, bright constellation, Leo, but once you've seen it once in the night sky, you can find it again quite easily, I think.
Yeah, you can. We've mentioned that Mars is currently in Gemini, when Gemini is marked by the two bright stars, Castor and Pollux. We've got, if you draw a line between Regulus and Castor, which is the upper of those two stars in Gemini, the two twin stars, the midpoint marks the position of the Beehive cluster, Messier 44, which is always a lovely sight in spring, isn't it? I like the Beehive cluster. Best seen with binoculars, really.
Or finder's scope. Look at it on with your finder. That's also a good way of viewing these open clusters, because they just get... You zoom in too much, don't you, when you use even a small telescope zoomed in. Yeah.
With the Beehive, yeah, you can look right through it. But it's worth noting where the Beehive is if you haven't seen it before, because you will find that the planet Mars will make a beeline. You see what I did there?
Oh, very good.
Towards the Beehive cluster as we head into May. So it will actually go through the northern part of the cluster. Should also give a shout out to the other Messier. Beehive cluster is Messier 44, of course, because you could easily mistake the Beehive cluster for a comet.
Yeah, I think he was just at this point. I think he was just trying to increase the size of his list,
the numbers in the Messier catalogue.
Yeah.
But there is another nice Messier object there, which is M67, which is another open cluster, very close to the dim alpha star of Cancer, which is Acubans.
Yeah.
I like M67. It's much dimmer, much further away, and a very ancient cluster.
Right.
Quite lovely.
In fact, so some of the stars in that cluster, they are chemically, spectroscopically similar to our own sun. So I do wonder whether the sun was born in this cluster many billions of years ago.
That was a theory a little while ago, that the sun was born there and was ejected from M67, but I think it's now understood that's not the case.
No, I think the dynamics of such a scenario have been studied better, and it's now thought that that's not the case. But it's certainly an interesting connection with this cluster.
Yeah. Well, we're getting a bit... we've been speaking for quite a long time now, so I think we'll probably draw it to a close here. There were quite a lot of specials, actually, as it turned out. But do have great weather for those eclipses. Do try for the lunar eclipse, even though I've said, it will disappear as it gets close to totality. It's still a beautiful thing to watch. You have a good partial to look out for. And the solar one, that should be quite spectacular, especially if you've got narrowband equipment. You can see it in H alpha alpha, etc., because the sun is quite active at the moment.
Yeah.
So let's bring this virtual planetarium to a close, and all that remains to say is thank you very much, Paul, and wishing you clear skies. Thank you.
Thanks, Pete.